who believe the government has a responsibility to care for them, who believe that they're entitled to health care, to food, to housing, to you name it. But it's an entitlement. These are people who pay no income tax. 47% of Americans pay no income tax.
The thing that he didn't account for is the tremendous burden imposed by payroll taxes. And even though 40% of Americans don't pay any income taxes, they still pay significant payroll taxes. Indeed, today I just read a statistic that 80% of Americans pay more in payroll taxes than they pay in income taxes. And these can be quite burdensome because unlike income taxes, they start at $1. But where it's particularly misleading is when it comes to this top 1%. We see this all the time whenever there are movements to impose more taxes on the wealthy. The stories start popping up in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Economist. Those are just in the past couple of months. They all say, what are you talking about? The top 1% are already paying 40% of the income taxes. And what this isn't capturing is that they are talking about, that statistic is referring to the top 1% of income earners, those with the most income, high income, lawyers, doctors, finance people. They indeed are paying a significant chunk of the income taxes. However, when it comes to the wealthiest Americans, the Zuckerberg, Bezos, Musk, Ellison, all the people we hear about so often, they are just as likely to be in the 40% of non-payers as they are in the top 1% of payers. And that's because under our current tax system, they are able to avoid taxes altogether by avoiding taxable income.
So walk me through this. You're Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. Congratulations.
Thank you.
What kind of taxes do you pay? What don't you pay? How do you end up not paying income taxes when you're Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk? Yeah. What are you talking about?
So first of all, let's focus on Jeff Bezos because he's much more of a classic case, right? For Jeff Bezos, he started his own business. He owns, a dominant amount of the stock. And over the course of the years, he has taken a salary that is no higher than $82,000. And it's been over 20 years now, and that's his salary is always capped at $82,000. And you might say, well, why would it be? He started the company. He's the man. Why isn't he taking a huge salary to reflect all of that he put into the company? And the reason is because salaries are for suckers. When people take a salary, they are subject to high income taxes and payroll taxes, and Jeff Bezos and a lot of our other multi-centy billionaires have no interest in paying those taxes. So instead, they take their benefits through the growing value of their stock, and their stock has grown enormously. And that massive growth of stock happens entirely tax-free with no time frame under our current system in which that stock will ever be subject to tax. And that is because we only impose a tax if the stock is sold, and Bezos never has to sell the stock because he can simply borrow against the stock and use that money to support his lifestyle and to pay any interest that's due on the loan.
So I want to slow this down because there's a lot in that answer. But there's this 2021 investigation published by ProPublica that came from actual leaked tax documents that gave us a real window into them. We actually know what they paid.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that investigation, what we actually saw and learned from that?
Yeah. So there is a fellow by the name of Charles Littlejohn. He was a contractor at the IRS, and he saw all of these tax returns, and he leaked them to ProPublica. He's actually in jail now because there were a lot of very rich, powerful people who were quite angry about this.
It is illegal.
It was absolutely
leak tax returns,
illegal.
Right?
And the reason this information was so important is because, well, tax scholars long knew that there were ways for wealthy people to avoid taxes by avoiding taxable income, right? Taking low salaries and not selling their stock. It was always met with, well, yeah, but that's just theoretical. That's not real. But here, when these tax returns were leaked, it was no longer theoretical. It was tax returns of many of our richest Americans paying zero in taxes. And so now it's no longer possible for people to say it's just theoretical, because we know that it's not.
I mean, that investigation found that year that Warren Buffett had what they called the true tax rate of 0.1%, Jeff Bezos 0.98%, Michael Bloomberg 1.3%. I mean, I pay much higher taxes than that.
Yeah. And so I think that, of course, what they're capturing there is their unrealized gains on their stock.
Then the next part of the story you're telling, what is the difference between selling stock to fund your lifestyle? Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, they presumably have private planes and multiple homes and fancy vacations. And what is the difference between funding that by selling stock and funding it by what you just described, which is borrowing against stock?
If they were to sell the stock, then they would have to do two things. One is they would have to pay capital gains taxes, which would be, when you take into account all the taxes associated with it, over 23%. So
it's still lower than on a high income.
Absolutely. Selling the stock is definitely a better play than having to take a salary. So,
because again, salaries are for suckers.
Because salaries are for suckers, and it turns out selling stock is for suckers too, but just slightly less of a sucker. So you get to pay lower tax rates than you would on your, if you were to take a salary. Your payroll taxes are, you don't have payroll taxes, you just have this net investment tax, which is less, and you have a 20% capital gains rate. So that's better than salaries, but not as good as borrowing against the stock. So you go to a private lender, probably. You could go to a bank, and their biggest risk is that they're going to lend it to somebody who is going to default on the loan. But if you're lending it to Jeff Bezos and he's giving you Amazon stock and other assets to hold as collateral against the loan, the risk of that loan going unpaid is nil. So they are basically making essentially a risk-free loan for which they offer very favorable rates, and still they profit from it because the business is to lend money. But the thing is, when we turn to Bezos' side, the tremendous advantage is that loan is entirely tax-free. So when he gets that money and buys his yacht, he has not had a taxable event. He continues to own his Amazon stock. He continues to be able to live the lavish lifestyle. And all he has to do is, pay a little bit in interest every year.
I want to stop you again on this. They don't need to pay back the loans, because this really doesn't feel intuitive.
Yeah.
Like, how is it possible to fund a lavish lifestyle on these loans and no one ever has to pay them back, right? At some point, in theory, the loan comes due.
Well, no. Only you're assuming that Bezos lives in the world of Americans who have 20-year loans on their homes, and the bank is lending the money, counting on getting the money back. These are people lending money in the business of lending money, and they're happy to keep lending money, because if you're in the business of lending money and you get the money back, then you have to find somebody else to lend it to. So why not just keep lending it to Bezos?
So you're just taking out, in this way of funding a lifestyle, one loan after another, sometimes paying one loan back with another. And you're just doing this again and again?
So I think what's hard to internalize is how much wealth it really is when somebody has $100 billion, $200 billion, almost $800 billion. But when it comes to somebody like Bezos and our other centibillionaires, their lifestyle they are not bumping up against the value of their entire assets, right? A few billion really supports quite a lovely lifestyle, and they don't have to get anywhere near where there's some risk that they can't provide sufficient collateral. It would be as if you, in order to support your lifestyle, needed to have $100 relative to the amount of wealth that you have. Do you think it would be hard for you to maintain a loan on that $100 based on the amount of assets that you have and borrow enough to pay the ongoing interest?
So something I don't think it would be hard, but something I think you're getting at here is that consumption doesn't scale. So even when we're talking about how do they fund their lavish lifestyles, look, I don't know what Elon Musk's carrying cost is year on year. I don't know how many homes he's got or whatever, but say it's between $25 million and $100 million. Yeah. It's penny change. It's a fraction of the interest.
Yes, that's exactly it. The other thing is that if they sell the stock, they run the risk of giving up control over their companies, and they also run the risk of not being able to enjoy the future growth of their stock. These are companies all heading into the stratosphere, and they don't want to give up any ownership. They want to keep going with this ride, and their stocks have proven to be a very good choice because the growth in value has far outpaced anything they have to pay in interest. So they get to retain control of their companies. They get to ride up the value of these tremendously profitable companies, and they get to do it all entirely tax-free while all the rest of us are left, holding the bag.
All right, so the story you're telling here is a situation where if you have enough money and that money is not seen by the US government as income, you can borrow against that wealth, and that creates a tax-free form of money that you can use, and you just keep rolling it over and rolling it over and rolling it over. I have a couple of questions about this, but before we get into those, I want to compare this maybe to somebody in the 99th percentile. Let's say you're a Beverly Hills surgeon making $2 million a year.
Yeah.
And then let's say you're a tech founder who has $180 million in company stock and only takes $1 a year in compensation.
Yeah.
Both of those people are rich.
Yep.
What is the difference in the way they are taxed?
So the difference is that, and that's a perfect example, the Beverly Hills surgeon is going to pay a lot of taxes, probably in excess of 50% on all of their earnings. So when they have however much they've accumulated over their lives, they've already paid significant taxes on that acquisition of revenue. However, our tech person who has a mere $180 million, right? Not a billionaire, a piker, still has achieved this $180 million entirely tax-free. There is no tax unless he or she sells the stock. And because they don't have to sell the stock, because they don't want to sell the stock, they often don't sell the stock. And here in the United States, they never have to pay taxes on that gain.
And so then what happens when they pass that stock down? None of us live forever, even though some of us are definitely trying, particularly at the levels of wealth we're talking about here. But assuming they don't figure that out, the wealthy pass away. When the very rich today pass away, and this stock or these other forms of assets we might be thinking about get passed down, what happens from the perspective of the tax system?
Theoretically, what's supposed to happen is that the estate tax is supposed to kick in. And its purpose was to address these transfers by gift and at death by imposing a tax at a pretty significant rate in excess of an exemption amount. Today, that rate is 40% in excess of $15 million. So theoretically, both of our taxpayers are going to be subject to some pretty significant tax liability if they have to pay a 40% tax on the transfer of property that's over $15 million. That's how we imagine the system working. The problem is that the estate tax has become so riddled with loopholes that it is really more of a tax in name only than it is an actual burden. And I will give you what I think of as the ultimate evidence of this, which is that the killing the death tax was the number one issue for the Republicans. Which is what they called the estate tax. Getting rid of the estate tax or killing the death tax was a big issue for the Republicans for at least the past 30 years, right? However, in 2025, when they had the chance to do it, right? So we had President Trump, we had an entirely Republican tax bill, and he could include anything he wanted. All of a sudden, estate tax repeal wasn't there. And why is that? I think it's because the estate tax has become so riddled with loopholes that it serves the wealthy more to keep the estate tax on the books, giving the appearance that the wealthy are paying taxes, than to actually repeal the estate tax, and which would shine a light on all of the ways the income tax system benefits inherited wealth.
Your specialty is estates.
Yes.
Tell me about some of the loopholes. Hey, I got $50 million.
Yeah.
And I want to pass that on to my kids, and I don't want the government getting a dime of it. They didn't earn it, and they don't deserve it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, it would matter here whether you were the surgeon or the tech entrepreneur with the stock, right? The surgeon has a much harder time because the surgeon has cash. They were paid in cash. They have cash. And it's a lot
They bought stocks or holding index funds, whatever it might be.
Yes, but most of their wealth was achieved in cash rather than in untaxed appreciation. And so here is where people who own stuff, typically stock, really are able to take advantage of the system in a way that others can't quite as well. If you have a business that's worth, let's say, $100 million, and you pass it at death at $100 million, it's valued at $100 million. However, if you cut it up into 3 minority pieces, 35%, 35%, and 30%, each of those pieces is entitled to a discount of up to like 30, 40%. Now, all of a sudden, your $100 million has been shrunk to $50 million, $60 million, and then it appears on the other side at your kids blowing back up to $100 million. That's one way. We call those minority discounts. But even better are devices where somebody creates a dynasty trust. These are really the...
Sounds good. I want a dynasty trust.
Exactly. And dynasty trusts are fascinating because the purpose of the estate tax was to avoid dynastic wealth, right? And it's a sign of how flagrant the estate planning can be that they actually just call these dynasty trusts. Yeah, we know they're supposed to not have dynasties, but we got dynasties for you. And what they do is they create a vehicle for your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, forever, in perpetuity, to benefit from this trust and the growing value of this trust. And they get funded through a lot of complex arrangements, oftentimes through sales. You will sell your stock early on to this company in exchange for a low-interest note. And for estate tax purposes, you've gotten it out of your estate, but for income tax purposes, you're treated just as if you're dealing with yourself, so you pay no taxes on that transfer. And these dynasty trusts, through devices like that, are being stuffed with billions and billions and billions of dollars. And this is happening all around the country. Around the country, estate planners are helping their clients fund these dynasty trusts. There's also charitable vehicles that are used where basically you give a charity an interest up front and then at the end it goes to a private person, but you price it such that all of the gain is somehow written out of the picture until it magically appears at the end of the story. I mean, it's the same thing with grats, rolling grats. A lot of these are stories of...
rolling grat.
Rolling grats.
Like of course, yeah.
Rolling rock beer, rolling grats. So a grat is something that is a grantor retained annuity trust. And you don't want to know what it is. But it is a device by which people are able to transfer enormous amounts of wealth tax-free. And these are just some of the many devices that are used and that estate planners have and have had for too long now.
Why do they have all these devices? Were the devices created to be used this way? Were they created for another purpose and people just figured it out?
Yeah.
Like, is this tax code designed to do this? Or has it been chopped up through kind of brilliant tax machinations?
So let me step back for a second. In order for a tax system to work, there has to be a dance between taxpayers and Congress or the IRS, whoever is the regulating authority. Basically, Congress sets out some rules, the IRS sets out some regulations, taxpayers and their estate planners or other advisors find ways around the rules. Congress or the IRS is supposed to come back in here and close the loopholes, respond to that. Taxpayers go out, they try to find other loopholes, and together there's this dance that it does a pretty good job of making sure that the tax system is doing a pretty good job of collecting the revenue we need in the country to run the country. For much of the 20th century, this worked pretty well with the estate tax. The estate tax was seen as a very innocuous tax, well accepted in the country. It serves as a backstop to the income tax system, which had all these ways for wealth to grow tax-free, right? And the estate tax was there as like a sweep-up tax to make sure that it was going to be subject to tax. The problem was, in 1990, they stopped. And that was the last time we have had any reform done to the estate tax. But of course, the estate planners haven't stopped. They have.
Did it stop? Because my understanding is we've had cuts to it since then. I mean,
Exactly.
George W. Bush, you could call it reform or not reform, but it has been chopped up and sliced up and made weaker
Right. So
quite a bit since then.
Well, what has happened is that there have been two changes. The exemption amount has increased and the rates have decreased.
And so there was a big discourse around this. I remember this a bit. Yeah, it's like, oh, these people are passing down family farms, and the family farms are getting taxed away.
Yes.
And so they cut it up then. So how does it change?
Right. So that double tax that hurts family farms and businesses, the death tax, that campaign was funded by 18 of the country's wealthiest families in the early 1990s. So the Mars, the Kochs, the Waltons, they all got together and they were like, okay, we got the income tax handled, right? We can borrow, we can avoid salaries, but this estate tax, Congress keeps fixing it. They keep doing the generation skipping transfer tax. They do the special valuation rules. We got to stop them. And they funded this campaign to turn the public against the estate tax. And they did so by telling the public that the estate tax was an immoral death tax, making it seem like it came for everyone, right? Rather than the estate tax, which definitely had a sort of a rich people air to it. So they said, no, this is a death tax. It comes for all, and it particularly harms family farms and businesses. Now, what they didn't say was that there are actually a lot of provisions in the tax code specifically designed to protect family farms and businesses. And indeed, Congress had a very hard time finding actual examples of people who actually lost their farms. Their favorite person who they used was this fellow by the name of Chester Thigpen, who had a farm.
What a name.
Yes, and he was the grandchild of slaves, and he testified in Congress that he was afraid he was going to lose his farm due to the death taxes that were going to be imposed when he died. And he was so effective that Republicans wanted to call it the Chester Thigpen Estate Tax Repeal Act because he was such a compelling figure. Well, a few years later, Chester Thigpen dies, and turns out he wasn't subject to the estate tax at all, because in fact his farm fell well within the exemption and there were other areas to protect it. So Congress could have easily addressed the family farms and business a problem, if one sees that as a problem, by basically expanding the protections that were already there. But instead, they were using it as a cover for all of the people, the Mars, the Waltons, all of those people that had massive amounts of inherited wealth, and they wanted to be able to pass it tax-free.
Okay, so